Melania, welcome to Brussels.
Thank you.
You came from Kiev, right?
Yes.
What's your first impression? You're here, we are in the European Council, so this is the EU summit, all the head of state of Western and Eastern Europe are here. What's your impression? What do you...
The first impressions are very good. It's a refreshing kind of view on Brussels and how Ukraine is on the agenda all the time, and everybody's very convincing about the fact that they're going to support Ukraine till the end, which fills me with hope, and it's the right thing to do. A lot of young people in Ukraine have virtually lost the best years of their lives to all sorts of political and other situations in Ukraine, but war has been especially traumatic, and some of us had to put our lives on hold. And some of us went to war to fight, and some of us had to change our line of work to completely countering and helping, Ukraine work in the media sphere as well as on the battlefield.
How is doing your job right now in wartime?
It's very stressful because, Russian propaganda machine and Russian information machine works very well, and it has worked for a very long time. And it takes a lot of will and a lot of energy to convince people about, the truth. And it's not even the typical things that are the most difficult to counter, the typical lies, the Russian propaganda that's very on the nose. It's more about these almost truths or half-truths that are often spread by the conventional media, right? So a lot of the times, running after objectivity and trying to find this objectivity, people tend to give, Russians and terrorists, they give them the voice and the platform to speak. Which, is somehow, it could be justified, but it makes our case so much more difficult. The biggest issues, the biggest concern in terms of media has been that up until February 2022, every major international news outlet had their headquarters that had to do with Eastern Europe in Moscow. So everything on Ukraine has been reported from Moscow. And it gives you this kind of prism, you have this lens of looking through, Ukrainian, Belarusian, even sometimes Polish issues through Moscow lens. And I'm glad that this is being resolved now. We have these big media come to Kyiv and establish their offices there. But undoing 30 years of information warfare is a lot. But it's about just checking and fact-checking all over again. One of the more painful narratives has been the far-right issue in Ukraine.
Yeah, this is something that even we in Western Europe heard a lot. In Ukraine, there are Nazis, they wanted to invade Russia.
Yeah.
The flags, we saw flags.
Yeah, the flags. But you know very well, more than I do, that Ukraine does not have a far-right issue more than any other European country does. Every country has bad people who have bad ideas, who are to be judged, and it's fine. But since 2014, Ukraine has not had a single far-right politician in Ukrainian parliament, for instance, unlike some other European countries who have.
It's hard because, it's your words against the
It's not even just
world,
my words against somebody's, it's disproving something that has already been let roam free is very difficult. It's just much easier to make a statement, right? And then you don't bear any responsibility for it. And this is what Russian news media outlets have been doing for 30 years. And imagine trying to undo the 30 years of narratives that are already set in people's minds. It's important to distinguish between what is media and what's not media. So I understand what you mean by I want to be objective, there's Russian media and Ukrainian media. But is Russian media really media? Or are they just informational instruments in the hands of Russian government? It's very important to distinguish the Ministry of Propaganda from information. Because not all information is news, and not all information is facts. It's important to always, it's important to talk to people, right? It's important to gather evidence. And I cannot remember a single time when Russian media was able to provide any sort of evidence to their claims. So that's the journalist's work. You have to verify. Just presenting others' opinion that's just giving platform to lies, right? It has to be justified somehow. So yeah, it's important. And then the same goes for the prohibition of certain media outlets in Ukraine. Those were not media. Those were enclaves of Russian propaganda machine in Ukraine. Did your university have a Slavic department?
Personally, no.
But you know about, universities in Italy, in Germany, in America, they have Slavic departments. Those Slavic departments are not really Slavic. They're Russian literature and culture departments, usually. And every single thing about our part of Europe, our part of the world, has been very Russia-centric. And whenever people abroad go to university and study Russian studies and become experts on Russia, you read a book, a literature piece, and you cannot believe that people who wrote this book could do something as horrible as Russia is doing right now. It's a very sentimental thing that a lot of people are living through right now. They cannot imagine that such great culture and that such great country could ever do Bucha or Mariupol. And Russia has been very good at siphoning money into think tanks, into educational institutions, into media, obviously, and they have been doing Russia Today, I think the RT works very well in Italy, in all over the place. They have been working hard, and it's difficult for people to change their minds when they're set in their ways, especially if it's academia and if it's media. So these myths and these lies are very, vivacious. They live, but Russia has shown their true face a year and a half ago, and they're not doing better. They're not making amends, and people are emphatic. People, relive this with Ukrainians, and so that's how. It pains me that it had to come to this. It shouldn't have, but yeah, it's a matter of education. It's a matter of looking at a country as a subject, not as a sphere of influence of somebody, There is a problem with Russian propaganda and Russian money everywhere in Europe, definitely. Italy is not an exception, however, it's not as bad as some other countries are. For instance, we can obviously see the Russian influence in Hungary. The position of Italian government is very vocal in support for Ukraine, which is a good sign, even though you do have issues with parties and media especially.
Being here now, you see we are surrounded by journalists actually.
Yeah.
So what's your feeling? What do you feel like?
Definitely, this is very inspiring to see, and I hope, someday when Ukraine's part of the club, when we actually join the EU, some of our journalists can stay here, and some of our politicians can actually, help help Europe be better.
Thanks again for your time. I hope that day will come very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.